Hey everyone, this is Pastor Alec again, joined by Eli, and we're just reading through Genesis.
Yeah.
So, how's it going?
Pretty good. Rainy outside.
It is today.
Yeah.
It is very rainy
Yeah.
outside, so it's nice to be indoors.
Oh yeah.
And all right, Eli, what you been reading? What you
Um,
got for me today?
I've been doing 11 through 20
Oh wow, all
this
right,
past week.
11 through 20.
With the Tower of Babel, more of an observation.
Okay,
You
sure.
just constantly throughout the book of Genesis, you're seeing what humans have been around 1,000, couple
Yeah,
thousand
yeah,
years. But there's just nothing but disobedience over and over again.
yeah, yeah. It's like from the beginning. There's nothing but disobedience over and over
Right.
again. Yeah. Well,
Um,
all right. Well, but so. Uh, and the Tower of Babel is actually a really important episode
right.
for human disobedience because it really sets up the history of Israel. We like to talk about the history of Israel and talk about major events. We of course remember the Exodus from Egypt,
Right.
which is a major event, but sometimes we forget about the Babylonian captivity
Yeah.
of Israel way later on, specifically of the tribe of Judah after the northern kingdom and all the other tribes are kind of wiped out. And that's a major turning event for them, a major event. So much so that when Jesus, when he's born, I'm thinking in Matthew's gospel, Matthew outlines his lineage with, it begins with Abraham, goes to Jesus, but King David, the establishment of the monarchy over all of Israel,
Right.
is mentioned, and then the Babylonian captivity. So for the ancient Israelites, they see the Tower of Babel not just as human disobedience, but also it represents the major world powers out east
Right.
that could come in and kind of destroy them at any time,
Yeah.
and which eventually do.
No, that was in Ezekiel, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I remember you had a sermon about that.
Yeah, Ezekiel. Yeah, Ezekiel is he's one of the captives that gets taken out of
Right.
Judah from the
Yeah.
priestly class. So yeah, Ezekiel and Jeremiah are all
Yeah.
in Daniel, all in the context of Babylonian captivity.
Okay.
Yep.
And I was also saying once it gets to the lineages, you can tell that the ages are getting lower. It's not like so and so had this child after 140 years and then lived 700 years. It's
Yeah.
like so and so when Arphaxad had to live 35 years, he became the father of Shelah and then lived 403 years and had other sons and daughters,
Right.
rather than like 700 years.
Yeah. So now they're waiting to yeah, that's right.
They're-
He's only 35 now instead of being 600 or something.
Right. So,
Yeah. Well, so and you've mentioned that before.
Right.
You've definitely, that's something that you've talked about before, that the kind of noticed the ages,
Right.
especially right before the flood, right?
Yeah.
The 120 and
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that is a sign. It's hard to know exactly what to do with the ages, and that's actually historically, even before Jesus, there are different traditions of how to kind of deal with those ages.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of been a long-standing question, but what's certain is that coming off of the Tower of Babel, as you're moving to Abraham, what's very clear is that the stuff that we see from the creation of the world to Babel, which we don't always talk about it this way, but those entire first 11 chapters are kind of the creation narrative.
Right.
So God creates the world, and then he destroys the world and kind of puts it back into the state of how we started in the first place, just water,
Yeah.
right? And then the waters reside, and then you see the great place of world empire rise up on the plains of Shinar,
Yeah.
that's Babylon.
Right.
Okay, that's the Tower of Babel is on the it says on the plains of Shinar. It's and then God disperses them, but that's what humans do, kind of after Cain, kind of how we talked about Cain, kind of cultivating the city and cultivating civilization.
Right.
And we want to make a name for ourselves, and you can see this throughout history.
Yeah.
The Tower of
Yeah.
Babel repeats itself over and over
yeah.
again, and then what happens is, as you move then from those lineages from Babel to the call of Abraham or the call of Abram,
Yeah.
you see that with the ages, they are getting shorter, and you kind of get a sense that all the stuff that was taking place from the Tower of Babel and prior to Abraham, that's almost a time before our time. Not to say that the world was different at that time,
Right.
but it's kind of like Genesis presents it as these are the major things that happened to get us to where we are today.
Okay. Yeah.
And kind of today picks up with Abram.
Right.
And so by the time Abram comes onto the scene, we can kind of look around and say, oh, yeah, that's kind of the world as we know it today.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Yeah. It's like a time before our time.
Right.
So,
Like a different era, but
a different era.
if era had like a more extent meaning.
Yeah, well, I don't know what our well, see, and there are other cultures talk this way. Western culture would talk this way. They talk about the golden era, the
Right.
silver age, or
Yeah.
something like that. But the problem with, like, when the Greeks and the Romans would talk this way is that they would talk about it as like an era of like the Titans and mythology and all of
Right.
that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's not, Genesis isn't presenting that either.
Right.
You know, so we see that what's in Genesis is something that's real and historical, but it certainly is the world as we know it today is still kind of coming into its own.
Right.
Right. But Abraham, we can say, we know that
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fucking.
All right.
So also, this was confusing me, and I know it wasn't necessarily taboo at the time, but did Nahor marry his niece? I can't remember.
Yeah. So you've got, and you do have some marriage within the family there.
Right.
And you see that pretty late. You see that all the way through Genesis.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
like,
yeah, with Lot.
you see it with, well, yeah, the whole thing with happens a lot. That's kind of
Right.
you can also see that's
Actually, the last thing I read, I was like, I don't know if I could do anymore.
yeah. Yeah, so you're referring to, Lot's daughters after his
Yeah.
wife dies, get him drunk and then have sex with him and to have kids by him.
Right.
But then you see the people groups that come out of those are actually enemies of the Israelites.
Okay.
And so,
Right, it was
so that
saying
actually portrays it and saying, they kind of came about, these people groups kind of came about with a shameful beginning. That's
Right.
kind of what Genesis is trying to say. But in other places, it doesn't seem to, it doesn't, kind of, incest seems to be less of a big deal,
Right.
which we kind of look at and say, this makes me uncomfortable, and it should. Later on, when Moses receives the law from God in Exodus, and then you see it Exodus and Leviticus, and you see that kind of thing is no longer legal,
Okay.
right? So, but the law hadn't come yet, and so as Paul will talk about in like Galatians, people didn't. The law hadn't come yet, so there's not punishments for things,
Right.
right? Even someone like Cain who kills his brother Abel is not punished according to the Mosaic law because
Correct.
the Mosaic law hadn't come yet, right? So God gives him mercy.
Yeah.
Whereas if that happened during the time of Moses, he would have been executed for something like
Yeah.
that. So but you see it throughout all of Genesis. Even Jacob. I mean, he marries his cousins.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jacob marries Leah and Rachel are Laban's daughters, and they're cousins. And Laban is just that's the brother of Rebecca, his mom.
Yeah.
And even when Isaac and Rebecca get married, it goes back to the family.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, it's not something later on. It's something that would not only be frowned upon, but something you just would never do.
Right.
And even written into the law code. But at this time, they don't seem to be thinking that way.
Right.
Yeah. So
it was more or less just me wondering if that's how I saw it and it caught my eye.
yeah.
And I didn't know if it was written weirdly and it was different or whatnot.
Well, one more example since we're in this place is Abram and Sarah are half brother and sister.
Oh, really?
So
I
so
did
yeah,
not
so,
know.
or I should say, I should be consistent. Either Abraham and Sarah, as they're later called, or Abram and Sarai. As
Right,
their original,
yeah.
right. So yeah,
So was Abraham lying about Ishmael and having a kid with his wife's slave?
yeah.
Was
Hagar,
that dishonorable?
was that dishonorable? Yeah. All right. So the question about lying is he's not lying about anything,
Right.
right? But he is. God makes the promise that He is going to have the offspring that are going to number the stars in the sky, number this, the sand on the seashore, and Abram takes it into his own hands. Says, "Look, I'm old. My wife is old.
Right.
We haven't had kids, so why would we think that we could now?" And so they devise a plan that maybe it'll be through Hagar, Sarai's maidservant,
Right.
and so that's what they do, and they aren't listening to God because God makes the promise really to both of them.
Right.
So what happens is God, so he's not supposed to do that, but he does. And it creates a lot of issues within their households,
Yeah.
obviously, because Sarah, even though she's kind of in on the whole thing, she quickly sees that this is not a good idea,
Right.
especially after the child is born, and
Yeah.
she's and there are a couple times where they actually send them out of the camp completely. When it happens, and then later on when they do have a son, Isaac, and Ishmael, who's older than Isaac, is playing with him.
Yeah.
And there's a different questions about what exactly caused them getting upset and sending them out of the camp.
Right.
So, but yeah, they are not. Sarah and Abram take it into their own hands
Right.
and don't listen to God.
Right.
And Hagar's kind of caught in the middle of it all because there's not a whole lot she can do about it.
Yeah.
And she's put into a terrible situation. And this is something I don't think we talk about enough. Can you imagine being Hagar in this and not really having a choice
At all.
and trying to figure out how to deal with that, and then getting kicked out of the camp,
Right.
kind of left to die with your son, and God takes care of them.
Yeah. He blessed him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of shows you that, first of all, someone like Abram and Sarah, you do see a lot of deception
Right.
and their family through the entire narrative. And you also see God taking care of people even in the wake of their deception,
Right.
while also making a promise to Abram and Sarah themselves. So it's kind of this weird thing where God's like, you people just don't, you're not, human beings are just are evil, like we saw kind of the setup in the flood. And he just has mercy after mercy after mercy on those who are being treated poorly, and on those who are treating others poorly.
Right.
Which is really a profound thing. It really is.
And you can also see, like I was going into Sodom and Gomorrah, but that ties in with that.
Yeah.
You can see how when he saved Lot and his family, how he, even with his wrath, he gives mercy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he has mercy. The interaction with Abram and Lot leading up to that,
Right.
kind of demonstrates that, and maybe that might be something good to pick up next time on.
Okay. Yeah.
So why don't we pick up on that next time, and really talk about the Sodom and Gomorrah event, because I think people are interested in that.
Oh, yeah.
That's something that's interesting, but it also gives a clue into how God operates,
Right.
Or another clue. I mean, we see a lot of how God operates in all of this, and we might even be able to flesh out the whole Ishmael Hagar thing a little bit more too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, thank you for answering my questions.
Well, yeah, I mean, you always have great questions.
Thank you.
So thank you for bringing good questions.
yeah.
And, it's, I think, that's what happens when you read the Bible is you often end up with more questions than answers
Oh yeah.
because there's just so much there and there's just kind of so much to dig into.
Right.
So keep bringing them.
I will.
Yeah. And thank you all for joining us. And we'll be back next time as we continue to talk through Genesis.